On the morning of March 10, 1945, the canals of Tokyo were still warm from the heat of a firestorm. Overnight, roughly 100,000 people were killed. That morning, Imperial General Headquarters issued a statement to the entire nation. It reduced the previous night's events to a single sentence. Various places within the city were set afire. This photograph shows what those various places actually looked like. 16 square miles of the city were reduced to ash, leaving 267,000 buildings gone and 1 million people without homes. The true history of this morning lies in the irreconcilable gap between the physical reality of the burning city and the state-controlled language used to mask it. That gap had been built carefully over 3 years. The Japanese state used national broadcasts and local neighborhood associations to propagate a singular doctrine. The sacred homeland was militarily invulnerable, far beyond the reach of American bombers. Across the Pacific, Americans constructed their own idealistic framework. Brigadier General Haywood Hansell was the primary architect of a doctrine called precision bombing. Hansell believed the bomber was a scalpel. He argued that massive aircraft could execute daylight, high-altitude missions as a surgical strike to dismantle an enemy's industrial capacity, avoiding the mass killing of civilians. By fall 1944, Boeing B-29 Superfortresses arrived at Marianas bases, loaded their payloads, and computed the fuel required for the long trip to Tokyo. Both nations had staked their national morale and military strategy on distinct, carefully crafted theories. These theories were about to collide with the physics of an actual war. Look at the aircraft fuselages still sitting intact on this assembly line. In November 1944, over 100 B-29s targeted this specific Nakajima engine plant outside Tokyo, but the facility was barely scratched. The American strategy hit a permanent meteorological wall. A high-altitude river of air flows east over Japan at 120 miles per hour, the jet stream. This pushed the bombers across their aiming points far faster than bomb sights could calculate, scattering their payloads for miles. The raid failed, yet both sides immediately spun the outcome. Tokyo broadcast reports of a massive defensive triumph, while Washington fed the press headlines of successful bombardment to boost domestic morale. Faced with a reality that contradicted their meticulously planned doctrines, both governments instinctively chose to maintain the illusion and deceive their own people. The American command eventually recognized the mathematical failure. Major General Curtis LeMay took over the campaign, looked at the same high-altitude weather data, and discarded Hansell's surgical approach. LeMay stripped the defensive guns and armor from the B-29s to increase their bomb capacity. He dropped their cruising altitude, ordering them to fly at night, loading the bays with incendiary clusters designed to ignite wood and paper. On March 9, 1945, the target was the densely packed neighborhoods of the Shitamachi district. The resulting fires burned so fiercely that intense thermal updrafts actually tore the wings off planes flying overhead. The next morning, the Japanese government needed to prevent immediate panic. They deployed their calibrated phrasing, reducing the deadliest air raid in human history to various places set afire. By March 11th, the smoke was still rising, and half the city knew someone who lived in the impact zone. Realizing the devastation was too large to hide, the state abruptly flipped its framing, pushing stories of American barbarism to the front pages to manufacture outrage. Minimizing the dead on Tuesday and weaponizing them on Wednesday revealed a state apparatus with no underlying moral center. Suppression and amplification were simply interchangeable levers used to exert total narrative control. This aerial photograph maps the systematic destruction that followed through the summer of 1945. Look at how these densely clustered bomb craters scar the residential grits of major cities across the country. Eventually, the air raids grew so large that the Japanese military made a quiet internal calculation to preserve their remaining aircraft for an expected ground invasion. When hundreds of B-29s approached Osaka, not a single Japanese fighter rose to meet them. The civilians below watched those silver shapes drone overhead without encountering resistance. The anti-aircraft fire bloomed uselessly below the planes, making it obvious that the state's promise of protection was hollow. The government had spent years scripting every syllable read by the public. Yet, the most definitive proof that the war was lost arrived without a single official broadcast. It was communicated through the terrifying absence of a defense. On August 15, 1945, the emperor spoke directly to the common people for the first time. To formally accept the Allied terms, he utilized the exact same NHK radio network that the military had used to construct its alternate reality. By the time the surrender documents were signed in Tokyo Bay, more than half of the capital had been reduced to ash. The physical rubble already told the public everything their leaders had tried to withhold. Decades later, an echo of this institutional stubbornness persisted in America. General Haywood Hansell, the man who drafted the original strategic air plans, spent the rest of his life acting as a strange mirror to the Japanese state. Until his death in 1988, Hansell methodically argued that his precision daylight doctrine was the correct path. He continued defending a surgical theory, entirely dismissing the reality that LeMay's brutally blunt incendiary tactics actually worked. It takes an immense amount of architecture to build an official reality, and when those carefully constructed doctrines finally fail, the architects often cling to the blueprint long after the real world has burned to the ground.